Hello, my name is Mage and welcome to Black and White Thinking and to a very hatchet review of Harley Quinn Season 4, Episode 5. I have no script for this one, I'm not even going to pretend I do. I have had such a busy week and they're only going to get busier. I am getting married in less than a month and it has been more stress than I could possibly have ever comprehended. I still wanted to share my thoughts with you guys, however, so I'm going to share a few thoughts, discuss a few comments, do the best I can with the little time that I have. If you enjoy this absolute shit show, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, yeah. So in this episode, we followed Ivy as she had a statue made for her, as she neglected her responsibilities as a mentor, and as she grew her fame across Gotham City. We followed Harley as she desperately tried to please the Bat Kids, initiating them into some sort of friendship, even calling them her family at one point after the success of the last episode. Dick was a dick about it, and then Barbara went missing. And most of the episode followed Harley after having got surgery to literally impress the Bat Kids, searching for Babs. The episode ended with an insane scene that we will talk about as we go on. So this episode was wild. I watched it like 3 times trying to take notes and I just kept missing stuff. So there's probably chunks missing from this review that I should have addressed and didn't. I don't know if it was me or if the episode was just chop, chop, chop super fast. And that's why I couldn't seem to follow it. This episode felt like it was built up of little things that all meant something, I guess. But there was a lot to like. A lot to be WTF at, but there was a lot to like. This episode felt like an episode of cameos or appearances. We saw a lot of people in this episode that we either haven't seen before at all or who we haven't seen in a while, including but not limited to Jim Gordon, who I really don't care for this Jim Gordon like I do. He's not my favourite character or anything, but I love the fact that he's played by Christopher Maloney. It is just hilarious to me as someone who's seen every single episode of SVU. I think it's a great take. They are weirdly similar cops. I am one of the few SVU stans that doesn't really care about Stabler. Anyway, we saw Tawny, who we haven't really seen for a while. I guess we saw her in the first episode, the second episode, but I don't know, it's always fun to see Tawny. I like that this Gotham is established as a world that exists outside of Harley and Ivy. There are these recurring characters that world build through their appearances, I guess, is the best way to say it. We saw Bud and Lou again, who I always miss and I'm always ready to see more of. There is never enough Bud and Lou content in any Harley story. We saw Kara Zor-El, who, again, I also love. I'm not really sure about how I feel about this take on Kara Zor-El. She's a bit pretty, but the night vision joke, her being an optician, was pretty funny. Again, she looks really, really well put together, which, I don't know, my personal headcanon for Kara is a bit more messy than that, but whatever. It's a bit CW for my liking, but I was really glad to see her. We saw an appearance from Ivy's curly hair, which is always appreciated. That is my favourite look on her. I wish she could just walk around like she did at the end of last season. That was by far her best outfit. I like the curly hair and the vines. If we could have that all the time, I would be super happy. And most importantly, we saw Alicia Yeoh, who, wow, I did not expect to see her in this episode. I got really into Batman and Bat Family comics around the time that she was introduced by Gail Simone as a character, with all the Death and the Family stuff, and yeah, that entire Batgirl run is really important to me. I mean, I have mixed, mostly good feelings about Gail Simone, and it's nice to see, I don't know, it was just nice to see Alicia appear on screen. I was really happy with that. I also really liked the scene where she was talking to Harley about how Harley retroactively helped her come out. I don't know, as a bi Harley stan who makes these reviews and, makes this channel and does all this BS. I don't know, that felt really special in a weird way. My best friend is a trans woman. We actually met because of my first ever Harley video, the one where I talk about the first 2 seasons and how much I enjoy them. So I don't know, it felt special. And I appreciate its inclusion. I'm going to talk a bit about Ivy first and then Harley, because I guess this is the Harley Quinn show, so I should leave Harley to last to have the most space to rant, even though I probably have more to say about Ivy this episode. So this episode saw kind of the extension of what we'd already seen in the first 4 episodes, which is Ivy falling down a hole and becoming kind of neglectful, which is really weird because usually she's very nurturing, and like being a nurturing person is in Ivy's blood. The blood of her character, the bones of her character are built from nurture, kind of the whole point. I am glad to see, however, that what I originally thought was potentially kind of just shoddy writing is actually a art. It's not necessarily one I understand, and I'm not quite sure why they've gone this way with Ivy. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense to me. It might have if she began the show like this, but kind of pulling it out of nowhere in season 4 that she just like suddenly wants fame is, I don't know, it's strange. It's not my favourite choice, but there is an arc there. It's an arc I can see. This whole kind of fame versus family fight kind of also mirrors Harley's obsession with her new family versus her old family, and trying to fit in with new people who don't really give a shit about her, who she gives a shit about more, and therefore neglecting her actual family. And Ivy was definitely neglectful of Harley in this episode, bulldozing over her when she came to visit, and I know that Harley was definitely overstepping the work relationship boundaries they set, but Ivy was incredibly self-centered across the board in this episode, and that I don't think is un-Ivy. I just think the fame and fortune thing is a bit strange. I'm also curious to see, this is a complete side note, what's going to happen with the Joker, because we saw last episode, but he wasn't in this one. Complete side note, haven't got a script, just remembered that I wanted to talk about that, so just hold that thought. But yeah, Ivy is on one, I guess is the best way to put it, and Lex is probably going to be super pissed at all of this. I can only imagine. I definitely think there's going to be some sort of like Lex versus Ivy thing going on in the last half of the season. I'm not sure exactly how that will go down, and I'm not sure if it will involve the Joker or how it will involve Harley and, you know, anything that happened in that last scene with Dick. So I feel like this is all going to build to a head though. Both storylines are going to kind of collide in some way that will kind of make Harley and Ivy question everything that's already happened this season, but I'm really not sure how at this point. Ivy will, though. She will have her whole world crash down upon her in the next few episodes. Like I said, maybe related to the Dick thing at the end of the episode, maybe not, but it will definitely crash in regards to Lex and the LOD. And like, I know she's going to snap out of this. She always does, but she will first have to reap what she's sown. She is on a high right now, but this whole trajectory she's been on is self-sabotage. And she is playing into kind of all the tropes and lies that people place on her in this canon and many others. So I'm curious to see where that ends up, and it's kind of actually weirdly sad to watch. It's kind of a perfect summary of how the world sees Ivy versus how Ivy actually is. Speaking of Ivy, I'm going to get to this comment when I talk about the comments at the end, but someone told me to mention my Maiden Ivy video, and you know what, I'm going to. It's probably like my best video, and it got demonetized, which means it's been hidden in the algorithm by YouTube. Thanks, YouTube. I have been working on the second part for like a year now. If you fancy watching a really long video about Ivy and her history and why she's the way she is and why people think she's the way she is, please consider watching that video, because again, it took me months to make, and I actually think it's pretty good. It's definitely better than this one. Okay, Harley, let's talk Harley. So Harley is desperate. Again, I guess this Harley's always a little bit desperate. It's kind of also sad to see. She has like serious abandonment issues, but I don't think she realizes that jumping from person to person, new group to new group doesn't help that. It doesn't build any real foundations. And it's like she misses that. Like, she was calling the Bat Kids her family in this episode, and it's like, where you have a family, you had a family, and you chose to walk away from them. And it just feels like she lets her abandonment issues lead. She lets them decide for her that anytime someone gets close, Ivy or the gang or whoever, that it's not going to last or it's not worth it. So she should just move on to the next shiny thing. And that's also kind of it's just sad to watch, right? Like, what is she going to get from the Bat family that was missing from the gang? I'm really not sure, if anything. And Ivy being so distracted and kind of self-obsessed over the last episode or two hasn't really helped. It's felt like they're really far apart as a couple. We haven't had a lot of them time for either of them to discuss their shit, and I feel like that's quite glaring at the moment. It's definitely something I want to see addressed over the next few episodes, and not just for shippery reasons. I just think from a storytelling perspective, it would make sense at this point. I feel like they both need a bit of a reality check, and they're good at giving that to each other, so yeah. My biggest moment from the whole episode was that last 5 seconds. Is what? What happened? What just happened? Is that actually Dick? Is he actually dead? Because, like, that feels like a big deal. If he is dead, like, what the fuck? No one is safe in this show. Like, they literally just hack at anyone they want to. And, like, again, that's a really big deal. Like, huge. Like, one, I don't know how they'd get away with that at DC. And two, it will, like, completely change the trajectory of Harley's Bat storyline this season and maybe the show forever. Like, there would be no coming back from that. And it's kind of scary to think about. Like, that's Bruce's firstborn son. What the fuck? Like, if that is Dick, I don't even want to know what Bruce's reaction's going to be to this whole thing. And we've had, like, very little Bruce this season. So, yeah, I don't even know what to make of that. I'm scared that it will just have been, like, a false alarm. But then I'm also kind of scared that it will actually be what it looked like. And I don't want to comment either way because the whole thing is just insane. Absolutely insane. I'm not touching it with a barge pole. One thing I do want to ask, though, is if that is Dick and he is dead, is the friendship bracelet like a sign that he did finally give a shit about Harley in the end? Or was that a message for Harley from whoever did that to Dick? Or did he just like freeze out there? I don't know. I'm so confused by that last scene. It's even more confusing than the scene from last week. Like, are they connected? Was it Harley that did that in some way? Like, I don't know, and I don't want to know. I am kind of freaking out about the consequences of that and where it's going to lead this show, because it's huge. It's just huge. And I don't know what else to say. It's kind of like, I think that might be part of the reason that I was struggling to review this episode so much, is that like that last scene just took it out of me. I can only think about that last scene. Everything else in the episode feels void, which is crazy. It's like Ivy got a statue built for her the size of a tower, and it feels like small pickings in comparison to how the episode ended. So yeah, let me know what you guys think. Do you think it's connected to the end of last week's episode? Do you think it's Joker because he was mysteriously absent this episode? Is it an accident? Is it even Dick? Like, let me know your thoughts, because I am flabbergasted, I guess I could say. It's a weird one, and it's a choice if it is the truth. Okay, yeah, that's all I've got for this episode. I know it's not particularly in-depth, and I definitely could have done better, but I am running out of time to get this out before the next episode airs, and I've had so much going on. So I'm going to talk through a few comments, and I'm going to leave it at that. What a mess. So, comments on last week's video. I am not sure if I'm going to have a chance to go through all of these. I'm going to try as best as I can. First comment coming in from my friend Yumikana, who I've been talking to for a while and always sends me awesome comic recommendations. Yumi said, "It might just be me, but it feels like the plot is trying to go from A to C without a proper B, if that makes any sense." And it does. I think this season has made a lot of assumptions about what the audience will accept, because we've already had 3 seasons of Harley and Ivy, and I definitely think they should have either tackled perhaps the Ivy storyline or the Harley storyline, because fitting them both into this season has left us with like 8 minutes each per episode to go over what they want to go over. If you also include like all the background stuff, that probably takes us to about 22 minutes, right? And it's not a lot. It's not a lot of time to do what they want to do. And it does seem like the plot has skipped a few important steps. There are definitely plot beats that could have been expanded. There are definitely plot beats that just don't seem to exist where they should. So yeah, good comment, Yumi. Gay Cartoons left me a lovely long comment. I'm going to summarize the bulk of it as best as I can. They said, "Again, I pretty much agree with all your thoughts on episode 4. I do feel like my thoughts on Ivy's arc in this ep have been very tangled up with my thoughts on her in episode 5 by now. That's my fault for putting the episode review out so late. But in terms of this individual episode, I definitely appreciated that it addressed the fact that Lex, at the very least, is not actually on her side. One thing I actually really enjoyed about Ivy in this show is how she does screw up with and miss social cues and doesn't always pick up on people's hidden intention. It feels extremely relatable to me as an autistic person, and I know other people have said the same about her, including the writer of the spin-off comic. But I feel like elements of this arc were the writers taking the aspect of her character as if this was purely a social situation, i.e. she seems to actually believe Lex cares about her, then is forced to realise he doesn't, when it actually has wider moral implications. Like, whilst I can believe and even appreciate Ivy not always reading the intentions of people around her correctly, it feels patronising to have her go against her own strongly held opinions about the Lord, about Lex, about the patriarchy and whatever else, with that same basis. I don't know if that makes sense, but essentially there's a big difference between her falling for Lex's bullshit on a purely social level and her being willing to throw in with people who fundamentally do not stand for the same things she does. The former feels like a relatable aspect of this version of her character. I genuinely love Ivy being awkward, but the latter feels kind of like it underestimates her and makes her morals seem pretty flexible. In terms of my personal experience, I might well make the kind of social mistakes Ivy makes with Lex, but I wouldn't be compromising my own beliefs to align with someone who in no way aligned with me in the first place. Hard agree. I know I said this last time about your comment, but like hard agree. This Ivy is very autistic coded. She is just practically written as autistic, or at least she has been. And I do think there is something a little patronizing about this whole situation. Again, her misunderstanding social cues sometimes does not really compute with her throwing her own ideals down the toilet. My partner's autistic. I have multiple siblings that are autistic. I have a parent that is autistic. It's something that I am very familiar with. And the Ivy and Harley dynamic is funny to me because of that in a lot of ways, because, you know, my partner is autistic and she's a botanist. And I'm, well, me. Crazy, dye my hair too much, make bad life choices. I do really enjoy this take on Ivy as well, and I don't even think it's the first time that I've seen this take. There are a few comics where I think this take, this, again, Ivy being autistic coded thing is portrayed, and I don't know whether that's on purpose in these comics. Sometimes I don't think it is. It's just a weird aesthetic choice the writers make to autistically code someone but not call them autistic. Whole other issue I'm not going to get into right now. But I see where you're coming from. I think that makes complete sense, especially for this Ivy. And I don't like that in this season, like you said, that there is a level of her coming off as naive, because being socially awkward does not equal being naive to people's intentions, as much as I think the writers think it does. Ivy is so far from stupid. She definitely knows, or would know if written by anyone else, what's up with Lex and all the bullshit he's pulling. So yeah, I guess there's a huge reason I'm not a big fan of this choice, because it just doesn't make sense, right? Like you said, there are wider moral implications, and they are being ignored in favour of making Ivy, I guess, quirky. I don't really want to use that word, but it kind of feels like what they're going with. And that, yeah, it feels a bit gross. Anyway, good comment, and maybe one day I will finally get around to talking about autism and poison ivy, because that's a whole video in itself that could absolutely be done, especially with the help of my own plant-obsessed autistic girlfriend. Maybe we will get around to that one day. Thank you for your comment again, because you said it better than I could, and I think everyone should go read it if they get a chance. So, thank you for sharing. VS said, keep these videos coming, love them. Would like to ask you some Ivy-related questions, not necessarily related to the show, as I find your thoughts on the character to be very fascinating. Well, I really appreciate that. In the last year and a half, I have read over 100 Ivy appearances in DC Comics, and it takes over my brain. Do you read her current comic? If yes, what are your thoughts on it and the fact that it has been the highest-selling woman-led comic, dethroned temporarily only by Scarlet Witch for over a year now? I really, really like the new comic. I have one minor issue with them, but honestly, mostly it's all good over here. I think that they are the best Ivy comics we have had by far in a really long time, and I think they are respectful of Harley and Ivy's relationship and Ivy as a person on her own, which is rare. Should I review them at some point? Maybe I should do that, because it will come up in my Ivy series that I promise I'm still working on, but there's a lot to be said on their own. Personally, I love the fact that Ivy and Wanda, who represent unapologetic female rage, are getting their time in their zeitgeist. Ivy's success is especially wonderful. Yes, also agree, I'm a big fan of Wanda too. I am eternally angry on Wanda's behalf. I'm always happy to see Wanda do well. I love Ivy even more excited to see her do well. Ivy is such a misunderstood character, generally, and it's nice to see her shine in a decent story for once, because before this, even the good Ivy comics were kind of bad. Do you think Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie will be able to do Poison Ivy justice in a Harley and Ivy movie? Who would you like to see play Ivy and direct a Poison Ivy project, if not Gerwig? Or are people discussing Gerwig now that Barbie's come out? Interesting. I don't know. I don't dislike Gerwig's work. I actually quite like Gerwig's work. I wasn't a huge fan of her take on Little Women, but that's just like personal preference. I really enjoyed Frances Ha back in the day. That was one of my favorite films ever as a teenager and like in my early 20s. I think she really shone as like a director and an actor and a writer in that film. I think Greta could probably give it a shot, and I do trust Margot Robbie to do justice with it, and if she works well with Greta, it's probably a good idea. I don't really have a preference for who directs Ivy. My preferences are that it's a woman. I would really, really appreciate if a woman directed Ivy. And if we do get a man directing Ivy, I bloody hope that man is not James Gunn. I don't like James Gunn. And I'm going to leave it at that. In regards to who would I like to see play Ivy, that's quite a question. I've had a few thoughts over the years and none of them have ever really stuck. I think that this might sound like a random choice, but Janelle Monáe could do it. I think Janelle Monáe is an incredible actress and I think she could give it a real shot. There are a few other actresses I think could definitely handle the role of Ivy though. Maybe that's another video idea where I'll just discuss who I think could play Ivy. And I guess it really depends on age range they're going with, whether she's like younger or older, or if you were having her played against Margot Robbie, or if Harley was recast, or there's a lot of questions there that I would ask. And yes, VS was the one who told me to shout out my Poison Ivy, a feminist goddess through the male gaze series. They said, if you read this comment in your next vid, hype up your maiden entry and ask people to check it out as it is amazing and deserves more views. I really appreciate that. I do actually believe it deserves more than it got. I blame the algorithm because like I said, it was demonetized. So I don't think it's been showing up in people's recommendations very much. And I promise I am working on the next piece. I already have like 7,000 words for it. It's just huge. It's covering from like 1988 all the way up to like 2000 and something. And it's just a huge period in Ivy history that has kind of taken on a life of its own. But it will come. I promise it will come, whether it kills me. I'll probably have at least another installment after that, if not two, because I'll cover Crone, but then I think there is space for a fourth installment of the series discussing kind of the great cosmic mother overall and where we're at with Ivy now. So please go watch that video if you haven't, guys. It's by far my most researched video and underwatched one at the same time. Primal Synapse said, here's something I've noticed about Ivy, but I never thought about articulating until now. Despite her history in the comics and other TV shows as a sex symbol, as well as an amoral femme fatale who uses her seductive charm to bring others under her control to do her bidding, this show depicts her as someone who is comparatively straight-laced about sex. I don't mean that she's some kind of Victorian prude, but she's definitely more reserved than Harley, content to keep their exploits to the privacy of the bedroom, and is clearly uncomfortable around others like Nora who lacks discretion. I also noticed that this has remained constant throughout her progression arc in this series. I'm not sure if this has any significance, but have you made a similar observation in your analysis? Yeah, that's all true. It's also true that Ivy's sexuality on a personal level and her sexuality in terms of how it's used as a weapon have always been two separate things. I think a big thing this show purposely did was cover Ivy up, thinking it was a more feminist-friendly way to represent her, if that makes sense. I think this show was trying to avoid a lot of the pitfalls that it's really easy to fall into when writing Poison Ivy, and that includes over-sexualizing her, right? So I think they purposely made that character choice in order to approach Ivy from a more, again, so-called feminist angle. Whether or not it is a completely different discussion, and it really depends on where you fall in regards to how you see feminism and women's bodies and all that. But I think that was the choice that was made to distinguish her from the unclad, vine-wearing Ivy that is so over-sexualized in the comics. It's honestly a bit disturbing when you've read as many comics as I have. Like, there are some particular panels that I'm not even sure how they got published in comics that are available for children. Some of it is just flat out prawn. I'm not going to say the word because I'll get demonetized, and it's a bit shocking. But yeah, that's, I guess, my take on it. Jessica said, one thing I noticed is that Ivy went from I'm not a villain, I just care about the environment, to being the head of the most villainy evil legion in the show. Maybe that has something to do with her seeking approval from Lex and Steppenwolf, like she has imposter syndrome almost. Definitely true. I also think that Ivy has always kind of been desperate in the same way that Harley is for approval. They just find it in different ways, and Ivy, even in the comics, has always had a history of interacting with these sort of men, just not usually to this extreme. But imposter syndrome is definitely a way to look at it that I think is perfectly reasonable. Kent said, having Talia hook up with Luther seems like a why not to me. Both are unmarried adults. Ra's al Ghul would approve of Talia being with someone with power like Bruce Wayne, and both answer the question, what would villains do in their actions often? Yeah, I'm not against it. I think I enjoyed Lex the most in that scene that he shared with Talia Kent, so I wouldn't say no to more of that. Sam said, with this episode, however, I do want to say that I initially saw the whole Steppenwolf thing as Ivy just pissing off Lex on purpose because he wanted time with Steppenwolf, rather than her genuinely wanting the approval of Steppenwolf. She saw how obsessed everyone else was with Steppenwolf, that she knew that she could get it herself easily, and she did that. But the getting a drink after part was a bit off though. I'll agree with that, as well as how she would have definitely known sooner about how Lex viewed her and would treat her. In relation to that, I feel the writers more times than not tend to forget what they wrote about in the previous seasons, especially season 1 and 2. I know that has a lot to do with the writers changing as well as the show moving to HBO Max, but I also believe it to be an easily avoidable issue if some of them just went back and watched the series they're working on. Don't want this to come off as nitpicking or hating the show. I love it and I watch it all the time and have season 1 and 2 on DVD, but that issue has bothered me for a while. Anyway, I just want to say that I really enjoyed them killing Musk and Zuckerberg. Those are probably the most satisfying deaths I've seen in this show. Big agree to that last one. And generally, I agree. I have this with sitcoms. It happens quite a lot, right? That sitcoms get new writers and then entire past seasons kind of get swept under the rug. I am a big fan of What We Do in the Shadows. Every season seems to have a new showrunner on that show, and it's like really obvious. And it kind of works for What We Do in the Shadows because it's kind of about these characters that have lived so long that every day is like a new weird adventure that doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of like thousands of years alive. But with Harley, it's really kind of annoyed me because the first 2 seasons are fucking great, and I feel like they told a really beautiful, weirdly deep love story through those first 2 seasons. And now that Harley and Ivy are together, I feel like they are losing their momentum, and I just hate that. I really do. I'm curious what you think, Sam, about how Lex and Ivy are going to go against each other, or if they are going to go against each other this season, because I definitely think that's a possibility. Anyway, thank you for your comment. I really appreciate it, and I am looking forward to reading some more next week. I'm going to end this here. There are a few more comments that I think I've probably missed, but this video is just going to be so long and I need to get it all out, recorded, edited in one afternoon. So wish me luck. I pray to God that happens and I actually managed to get this out, squeeze it out just before the next episode airs. I apologize, this has been so clunky. I hope you find something of interest in it, and I will talk to you all again next week. My name is Mage and this has been Black and White Thinking. Thanks again.